The judicial system of the United States is founded upon a fundamental and guiding principle that every human being is deserving of respect and entitled to equal justice under the law.
As our nation continues to grapple with recent events, the Supreme Court of Virginia and many other state Supreme Courts have issued statements addressing the problem of racism in our society and in the criminal justice system in particular.
In a June 16, 2020 letter to the judiciary and the members of the Bar of Virginia, the justices of the Supreme Court of Virginia stated, "As judges, we must take all steps possible to ensure that in the courtrooms of the Commonwealth, all people are treated equally and fairly with dignity under the law. It is a moral imperative that we do so."
The undersigned judges of the Fairfax Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court join in the commitment to equal justice under law for all who seek justice in the Fairfax Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court. Further, the undersigned judges, individually and collectively, are committed to fair access to justice, equal application of the law, fairness, and will continue to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion.
We stand committed to these core values and recommit ourselves to examine, re-examine, and as necessary, expand these core values to ensure equal application of the law and to eliminate the effects of systemic racism in the Fairfax Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court.
We, collectively, as judicial leaders, have a responsibility to ensure our actions and decisions reflect equal justice under law without regard to race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, national origin, or socioeconomic status.
Further, as judicial leaders, we are committed to the identification and elimination of any issues or barriers to equal justice regarding any aspect of the court and its operations.
In reaffirming our commitment to equal justice under the law, we will continue to examine and review the court's practices, programs, services, and initiatives currently in place to ensure equal access to the justice in the Fairfax Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court.
The following list is not exhaustive, but is a brief example of the practices, programs, services, and initiatives that have been implemented by this court to address public safety, improve outcomes for children and families involved in our courts, and to address the overrepresentation of children of color in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems, and to provide fair, equal, effective, and timely justice.
Use of validated evidence-based risk and needs assessment to guide decision-making and to improve racial and ethnic equity by examining data to identify policies and practices that may disadvantage youth, particularly youth of color, at various stages of the process, and pursuing strategies to ensure a more level playing field for youth regardless of race or ethnicity.
School Diversion Alternative Accountability Program, AAP, to reduce the number of juveniles entering the juvenile justice system and to create systems of support for youth across agencies. AAP specifically targets the disproportionate number of Black and Latino students who are overrepresented in the school discipline and juvenile justice system. AAP is a collaboration between this court, Fairfax County Public Schools, the police departments of Fairfax and Vienna, Northern Virginia Mediation Services, and the Fairfax County Neighborhood and Community Services.
Juvenile justice transformation, including bifurcation of juvenile adjudication and disposition, as well as a complete analysis and risk assessment through an investigation and report to determine the appropriate disposition for a juvenile offender. Some of the factors assessed include the juvenile's pattern of offending, family strengths and protective factors, history of any substance abuse, aggression or violence, mental health and trauma, the juvenile's attitude and cognitive skills, risks to reoffend, criminogenic needs of the juvenile, and the availability of services and treatment to address the needs of the juvenile and his or her family.
Diversion, including diverting low-risk first-time offenders, Diversion First, increased use of detention alternatives, AAP. Comprehensive probation system review, graduated responses and sanctions. Trauma-informed court, education and training on adolescent brain growth and development, restorative justice, best practice court, child dependency.
We have a red team that works collaboratively within the court services unit to assist in the development and implementation of effective practices to reduce ethnic and racial disparities within the Fairfax Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court.
Ongoing and relevant judicial training, education, and programs that address the necessity of diversity, inclusion, and equity, including racial and ethnic identity, as well as cultural sensitivity and bias and implicit bias.
Ongoing and relevant court staff, including clerks, court services unit, core partners and service providers, training, education, and programs that address the necessity of diversity, inclusion, and equity, DEI, including racial and ethnic identity, as well as cultural sensitivity and bias, implicit bias.
Use of certified or competently trained interpreters and translators for litigants in which English is not their first language.
Ongoing collaboration and partnerships with our core stakeholders to ensure equal access to justice, including Fairfax Department of Family Services, Fairfax County Public Schools, Fairfax County Police Department, Fairfax Community Services Board, the Office of the Commonwealth's Attorney, the Office of the Sheriff, Public Defender's Office, the Fairfax Bar Association, and others.
Judicial participation at the local, state, and national level to further educate ourselves on the need for positive, systemic reform efforts in all areas of juvenile justice.
These practices, programs, services, and initiatives reflect our core values and commitment to equal justice under the law. The development and implementation of these practices, programs, services, and initiatives illustrates our commitment to transparency, accountability, and our willingness to continue to achieve the goals of these practices, programs, services, and initiatives.
In addition, we are committed to continuing in these efforts as well as intensify our efforts to combat racial prejudice within the justice system, both explicit and implicit, and to recommit to examine what systemic change is needed to make equality under law a reality for all who appear and seek justice in the Fairfax Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court.